So I'm going to dive into diversity. So a few years ago, when I first got into gut health, I read this book by Martin Blazer
Mhm.
called Missing Microbes.
Yeah.
And it was very eye-opening how the lack of diversity and missing the keystone species is negatively impacting our health. And there's a movie that I'm also a biology instructor at the college. I teach as an adjunct, and I have to infiltrate my belief system sometimes with the microbiome when we get into diversity modules because I think people need to understand the importance of their lifestyle. And there's a movie called Let Them Eat Dirt. You've seen
Okay.
that? I
No, I haven't.
highly recommend it. It is one that's very easy to understand. Children can understand it. As I play it for the college students, I even make it a lesson plan. Talks about some of the stuff that Martin Blazer talks about. So important to play in dirt. Kids do not do that anymore. They're in front of the computer. They're indoors. We're sterilizing everything. Hand wash, mouth. What is it? Antibacterial hand soaps. So on the one hand, wash your hands when you come out of the bathroom.
Right.
On the other hand, you don't need to wash your hands after playing in the dirt. But the last piece is Deanna Minich with the ANA. She did a wonderful talk at the ANA conference today about dietary diversity and eating the rainbow diet and diversifying the microbiome. It's There's another practitioner, Karzian, I think his name is.
Correct.
Um, Karazian, yes. I always mispronounce his name. Wonderful program called the Microbiome Mashup. Have you heard of
Okay.
that?
I have not. No.
It's really cool. I've been doing it with my dogs because my dogs tend to have dysbiosis, all that glyphosate
Yeah.
outside that gives them the diarrhea. So you take about 30 to 40 different vegetables, if you can find them in the grocery store, the stems, the leaves, all
Mhm.
the stuff you don't normally eat when you're eating food, and throw them in a blender and make these little, I put them in ice cube trays and throw them in the freezer and then just throw them in your food, like just little tiny little cubes, and you
Yeah.
throw them in a shake, throw them in coffee, whatever. You don't even notice that they're there. So the whole idea is diversifying the microbiome. That's the whole idea with these ideas.
Mhm.
Why do we need to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one last thing I want to also mention, I was looking to tell you, I thought it was interesting that the
Hmm.
Hasda tribe eats about 600 different species of plants and animals and 100 grams of fiber.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
What is
crazy.
happening to us?
Very similar to Papua New Guinea tribes too, and there's something really scary happening to us, right? And you
Yeah.
mentioned Marty Blazer. I love his book, Missing Microbe.
Yeah.
He has a follow-up film,
Oops.
I think it's called. And it's have you heard of that one, The Invisible Extinction?
No.
It's basically a documentary that is kind of the follow-up to the book, but it's more recent information.
Oh, I need to write that down. And the invisible extinction?
I believe that's what it's called. Yep,
Okay.
and Marty's part of the developers of it. I saw like a 15-minute version of it, and it's amazing. It's so good. And so let's unpack this a little bit, right? So I would easily say that when you think about the gut microbiome, the most important feature of the gut microbiome, hands down, is diversity,
Hmm.
right? That has been shown to be true throughout the last 10, 15 years of microbiome research. Diversity is so important that you can actually predict how long somebody's going to live based on the diversity of the gut microbiome at
Oh,
different
wow.
ages, right? There's so much good data now on longevity and diversity. And so you can look at somebody in their 50s and look at their diversity and predict how long they're going to live based on that. And all of the disease risk comes along with diversity issues. And so let's unpack why that is. So, I mentioned earlier that we have very few genetics, right? We have very few genes. We have 22,000 functional genes. That is wholly inadequate to survive as a human. So the vast majority of our genetic capabilities, our protein making capabilities, our hormone making capability, all of these things, the vast majority of it comes from microbes. And the biggest treasure trove of microbial genetics sits in our gut,
Hmm.
right? And if we lose microbes, or we have low non-functioning microbes, we lose a lot of that capability, right? So we lose a lot of genes. It's no different than just taking out your genes and your chromosome and snipping part of it off and putting it back in, right?
Oh,
It's like,
yeah.
whoa, what did we just lose, right? What can we now not do anymore? And so that's a big part of it. The other part of it is that a diverse ecosystem, and keep in mind that the gut is truly an ecosystem, right? And it's like any other ecosystem in the world. The more diverse the ecosystem is, the more stable it is, and the more resistant it is to dysfunction. The more, the more stable and diverse your garden is, the harder it is for a weed to take over and start killing all the plants, right? No different in the gut. When you have a high diversity of microbes in your gut, it's harder for new microbes to come in, or opportunistic microbes to overgrow and take over and create dysfunction in the system. And so just even if you just look at it from those two perspectives, number one is the microbiome houses the largest components of our capability. And when I talk about capability, I mean just being human in this space, right? To deal with all the things we're exposed to on a daily basis, to deal with the foods that we consume, to deal with the stresses of life. All of those things require a certain degree of resilience in the body, and most of that resilience is conferred to us from microbes, right? So we can unpack very specific examples. You mentioned oxalate, right?
Right.
So in your gut, if you have a healthy gut, you can eat all the oxalate-based foods you want, because there are microbes in your gut called Oxalobacter formogenes, for example, and other species that actually break down oxalates and use them in useful ways, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But if you're somebody that doesn't have that diversity, doesn't have enough of those microbes, oxalates can kill you.
Yeah.
Right? It's that
Really, it's a toxin. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely, right? So you can be somebody that has no issue at all with it. You can eat as much oxalate foods as you want, deal with it, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it could kill you.
I mean, look at like animals, like horses. That's all they eat is oxalates.
Absolutely. I
You
mean, our
know?
environment and food system has been full of those things, right? You can't imagine our ancestors going, "Oh, I can't eat that. Oh, I can't eat that. Oh, I can't eat that," right?
Yeah.
Like they're on elimination diets and eat only 6 things. We would have never survived as a species.
Well, I have my opinions about that. They were also probably not eating constantly. They were also fasting, but that's a whole nother
Exactly.
topic.
And again, but here's the thing, it ties in exactly to our conversation. Fasting, in fact, increases diversity in the gut microbiome. And that can be counterintuitive, right? Because you're like, wait, not feeding the gut also increases diversity? It absolutely does. And the reason for that is the microbiome is made up of different layers of fermenters, right? So we've got our primary digesters and fermenters, then we have secondary layer, tertiary layer, and so on. So what happens is when the big bulk macromolecules from food come in, the primary fermenters or digesters are breaking them down, right? They have the enzymes and the capability to break down the big molecules. And then they break them down, and the byproducts of that breakdown feed the next layer of microbes. And then they break those down, and then they create byproducts that feeds the next layer. All the while in this chain, we're producing all of these really important compounds, right? That we need for survival, for functionality, for resilience, for adaptation to the environment. So you have to allow each of those layers of microbes to have their time to do their metabolic function. If you keep eating and you have no periods of fasting in your day, then you're only feeding the primary fermenters. They're the ones that are the most active. The other layers aren't necessarily getting the time that they need to do what they do. And then you're missing whole array of molecules because you don't get all the byproducts from these other sections of bacteria, right? So it's a really important thing to keep in mind is that, number one, you need to feed your microbiome. You're eating not just for your own pleasure and the things that you've tied your mind to as being pleasurable, right? Like, oh, I only like this kind of food, or I don't like vegetables.
I get that so much
right?
from people. Yeah.
And I'm
very,
like,
very limited diet. I call it homogenous diets, just one or two foods, 3 foods that they're just eating over and over and over and over.
And over again. And it's either A, because they feel like they tolerate those the best, or B, because that's what they desire the most, that's what tastes the best for them, or whatever the texture. But at the end of the day, what we cannot forget is we're not just eating for us and our pleasure, we're eating to feed this massive nutrient factory in our gut. Because remember, more than half of all the nutrients you need to survive are made by bacteria in the gut. You cannot get them from food. You cannot make them yourself. You have to feed the bacteria the right substrates, and then they make it for you, right? So going back to diversity in the Hadza tribe that you mentioned, they absolutely eat around 600 different foods annually. So did our ancestors. Most of our ancestors, most of the people we evolved from, ate that kind of diet annually, and they ate seasonally as well, right? Because they basically ate what was available at that time, and they hunted, they foraged, they gathered, they did all of that stuff, right? They didn't have the luxury of being picky. They didn't have the luxury of going, I'm going to be carnivore this month, and they didn't have the luxury of going, I'm just going to be keto for a little while, right? It was all about like survival. And
Yeah.
our bodies are designed with that omnivorous type of survival capabilities. We're supposed to eat lots of different things.
Thank
Now,
you.
here's a very
I'm
critical
so glad you said that. Omnivores.
omnivores. It's so important, right? That's how we moved up the food chain. That's how we moved up the evolutionary ladder. If you think about a lion, my favorite guy back here, I'm a
Yeah.
Leo, so I have a lion back there.
Yeah.
As powerful and amazing as a lion is as a creature, a lion is an obligate carnivore. A
Yeah.
lion cannot eat plants, right? So if there's a drought and there's no wildebeest and there's no protein, the lion will die, right? And the same thing with the wildebeest. If there's a drought and there's no plants, the wildebeest can't start hunting squirrels and things like that. It's going to die.
Yeah.
But a human in that same situation can dig and eat worms, can grab shrubs and berries and eat almost anything in that area, right? That's why we move up the evolutionary ladder. Now, here's another really important point about that. Part of human evolution, and a very important stage in human evolution, was an incorporation of a large fermentive base in our colon, right? And that incorporation of a large fermentive base, which we now call the microbiome, or part of the microbiome, came from bringing in microbes from the environment and allowing them to stay there, right? So our immune system developed this mutualistic relationship, this symbiotic relationship, where our immune system over time learned that, hey, these microbes can actually be useful. Let's not attack them. Those microbes said, hey, immune system, we're going to play nice. We're going to make all these compounds that are good for the host. So don't attack us. We're going to have this great mutualistic relationship. We incorporated lots of those organisms, and the vast majority of organisms need plant-based material, right? That's how they came about.
I struggle with my field with what you just said, and I'm going to get chastised for saying this, but there's just way too many people who are jumping on this carnivore bandwagon right now, and even the people in the oxalate community, and I can't stand by that. After I started looking at your stool test and I started seeing the saccharolytic fermentation marker versus the proteolytic fermentation, I saw the keystone species, I saw the lack of diversity on all these people, and then I looked at all the nutrients that the bacteria was not producing, no butyrate at all, imbalanced short chain fatty acids, so low butyrate but high acetate. You want it balanced, right? And so when I started noticing that, and I've never been a big fan of extreme dieting anyway, I believe in balance. That's always been my motto. But again, people are like, oh, carnivore diet. And for the longest time, it's been vegan.
Right.
But you just mentioned the plants, and that's that saccharolytic fermentation, correct?
100%. Yeah. That is taking plant-based material and fermenting it and converting it to things like short chain fatty acids, which are absolutely critical for our survival. Even things like, for example, urolithins, right? Urolithins are a very important class of compounds, especially urolithin A. We'll take that as an example. Urolithin A plays a very, very critical role in the health of our mitochondria, right? Our mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells, right? And a very clear definition of disease and aging is dysfunctional mitochondria.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. The moment the mitochondria start to die or become dysfunctional, the cell starts to die or becomes dysfunctional, and then the organ that the cell makes up dies and starts becoming dysfunctional, right?
Correct. Yep. It all boils down to energy.
It does, yeah. And the capability of the cell to function, replicate, make nutrients and metabolize nutrients and so on. All of that is dependent on the engines of the cell, right? No different than in a car. A car is absolutely useless if the engine doesn't work, right? It can sit there in your driveway, look pretty, look nice. You can sit in it, but you can't go anywhere. That's how your cells work. Your cells have engines for that reason. The mitochondria, in order for them to turn over, and what happens during mitochondria, they undergo a process of cellular respiration. That is the taking in of glucose and sugar, fructose and so on, and converting it to energy, right? ATP. Basic cellular function, right? Yeah. Cellular biology 101. If your cell can't do that, then the cell is useless and it's dead. The only cells in your body that don't have mitochondria are your red blood cells. because the red blood cells have a singular function that is housing hemoglobin that grabs oxygen and transports oxygen throughout your body, right? Outside of your red blood cell, every other cell in your body has to have mitochondria and have to create ATP. If they don't create ATP, then you're basically dead. And so the mitochondria are the most important, arguably most important component of your cells. But what happens with mitochondria, like an engine of a car, when it's going through a metabolic process to create energy, it produces an exhaust, right? Just like a car's engine produces an exhaust that can be noxious.
Right.
In the case of the cell, the exhausts are free radicals.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? Oxidative stress and free radicals. And so the free radicals themselves will damage the mitochondria, will damage the cell, and so on. So we have all these systems in our body, like glutathione and peroxidase and all that stuff, to reduce the free radical damage.
Antioxidants.
Antioxidants, right? That's why they are so powerful and important. And where do we get most of our antioxidants? From plant-based material, right? From fruits, vegetables, colored things, the carotenoids and all that. So that's why we need them, because
Phytonutrients.
Our dying. Yeah, our cells are choking every single minute.
I know. I like I said, I'm struggling with what's been going on in the dieting industry. I know that the pendulum is going to have to swing back. I know everyone's going away, went from vegan, now they're going carnivore. And then I am concerned about colon cancer risks with that as well. I mean, that proteolytic fermentation, when I studied that, I realized how detrimental that, and I see it on the Biome FX stool test. Yep. So many people are favoring that proteolytic fermentation.
Yeah, because, we went to this phase where prior to the start of the carnivore kind of movement, it was like high protein, high protein, high protein, right? People were like,
Atkins.
Exactly. They're like, and
fat.
Yeah, between ordering a hamburger and just not eating the bun, just eat the hamburger. It doesn't matter what the quality of the meat is. People going to fast food restaurants and ordering, Big Macs and just removing the bun as if now it's healthy in some way. And then they were just doing protein supplementations, right? 50, 60, 100 grams of whey protein every single day. And that became kind of the standard for a healthy diet. And then now it's kind of moved into this carnivore space. And what is dangerous to me about it is the way some of these diets come about is one person does it and it seems to have some benefit for them. And then they write a book about it and then it becomes gospel.
Mainstream.
Right? Exactly. It's like, oh my God, that one person wrote a book about the carnivore diet. And they did it for 40 days and they lost weight and all that. I guarantee you, if you do keto, if you do carnivore and all, you will probably lose weight in the first 30 days or so. And the reason for that is not because of cutting out, plant-based materials or fruits and so on, is because you're removing most sugar sources.
Yeah.
Right. If you cut out sugar from your diet completely, however you do it, right, you will lose weight. That's inevitable. But your microbiome will start getting really significantly diminished over time. And long term, even 6 months long term, you will suffer from much higher risk of other conditions because your microbiome is being dysfunctional, is being decimated, because the vast majority of that fermentive base I mentioned earlier requires plant-based nutrients.
Yeah.
That's what they evolved on.
Well, the fat can also promote endotoxemia.
Absolutely. Right. So that's another thing. Like, fat was a luxury throughout the course of human evolution, right? There's a reason why fat smells so good to us, right? There's a reason why bacon.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, most people have a genetic affinity to wanting the bacon smell, right? The reason for that is because everything that is important to our species propagation, that is hard to find and takes work, our genetics created desires for those things to motivate us to go get it. Sex. Why does sex feel good, right?
Yeah.
Sex feels good because it's a lot of work and it takes work to find the two people that want to do it together and so on. And so we are designed to be motivated to do that, right? Can you abuse that? Absolutely, right? There's 1,001 ways to abuse the desires around sex, as people do all the time. No different than why fat feels and smells really good, because just think about in the wilderness, if you were a hunter-gatherer type of person, how hard it is to go out and find fat, because fat you have to kill, you have to chase down, you have to trap, you have to kill. It takes a lot more energy. It's a lot more risky than just gathering and picking things and digging for roots and tubers, which is what they did most of the time. But your body does encourage you to go out there and find it from time to time, right? but it doesn't mean that you should be on a fat only diet or predominantly fat diet for any period of time, right?
Oh,
Because
oh yeah,
yeah, it's and people bring up the Inuit Indians, for example, all the time, and I go, there are very unique species of human that have not only evolved their microbiomes to be able to survive on a diet predominantly of seal blubber, but as it turns out, recent evidence suggests that they also have certain genetic SNPs that have selected for
Mm,
them among their population that can do better with metabolizing fat than others, right? Who get less endotoxemia and so on, right? And so, balance is the key. And you never want to say fat's bad, protein's bad, plants are bad. There's lots of movements out there that basically are villainizing plants, right? They're basically saying, oh, plants have these anti-nutrients in it and lectins and all these things. And so you can't eat any of these things. All the nightshades are bad, right? I think a lot of it can be detrimental to your system if your microbiome is unhealthy.
for sure.
And that's what it comes
That's
down
what
to.
it boils down to.
Exactly. If your microbiome
Ultimately.
is unhealthy, almost anything that is even good for you can be a problem.